I'm going to talk a little bit today about power, gender, entitlement, and how feminism, or rather a severe ignorance of the very basics of what feminism is and stands for, has actually helped to push vulnerable men to the far right and embrace reactionary viewpoints. Now, a trick of fascism is to invert power and privilege in terms of making the powerful look weak and as if they are the victims and the victims to be the oppressors. And I don't think I really need to elaborate on this. Anyone who's vaguely aware of fascism has probably seen this in action. So the expectations of men under patriarchy are such that to become a man, as an adult man, you have to sacrifice a lot of what you are, because a lot of what you are is not going to fit into the very narrow mold of hegemonic masculinity, especially under fascism. So what happens is men give up large parts of who they are. They don't pursue hobbies and interests and careers that they might actually enjoy, because from a very young age they are told that that's not what a real man does. They don't display their emotions. They are taught to be distant and stoic. They are emotionally abused to the point that a lot of bad things manifest. And under patriarchy, they aren't given a lot of tools to actually deal with this. So what this leaves is men who do actually have at least what they see as a valid sense of entitlement, because patriarchy promises them rewards for embracing masculinity. And especially with a very precarious financial situation for the working class and shrinking wages, they aren't seeing those rewards. And obviously they're looking for someone to blame, because they feel like, look, I played by the rules, I did everything right, I hated the right people, I didn't act like a woman, so why are you treating me like this weak woman? I should have all the rewards that patriarchy offered me. Now, obviously, this is not a conscious thought. This is not even something most men realize that they have been indoctrinated into, because it's kind of like the allegory of a fish doesn't realize it's swimming in water. It's just the background of their worldview. So fascism comes in and is able to offer an answer to this that is also very gratifying, as far as it doesn't threaten their masculinity, which under patriarchy is always under threat. It's something that men have drilled into them that they always have to be very insecure about. And men who make these strict rules about masculinity and enforce them and mock other men for, I could probably come up with something to demonstrate how ridiculous some of these rules are, and I'm sure someone could find an example of a self-proclaimed alpha male actually doing something like this. One real example is, I don't even know his name, and I don't really care to. There's a man who obsesses over celebrities and the angle they are in relation to each other, and he's made rules as far as if you lean, or like how you position yourself, and whether you're dominant or submissive, or masculine or feminine or whatever. And he preaches about why this is important, and they genuinely seem completely unaware of how transparent this kind of thing is, that they are coming off as deeply insecure and the opposite of competent alpha men that they want to portray. But if anything is pathetic, it's not just, having these insecurities and broadcasting them, but actually following men that do that. What follows an alpha? A beta. But anti-feminism isn't exactly known for its overabundance of self-awareness. Anti-feminists genuinely do not have any understanding of what feminism is. Maybe some of the leaders do, and it's all part of the grift, but if they did have understanding of it, they probably would have a lot harder time rejecting it, because gender equality does ultimately make a lot more sense. But anyway, so we have men who have a lot of insecurities and are in a very precarious financial situation. That's not to say that women aren't as well. Women are actually 30% more likely to be in poverty. They make up the majority of low-wage workers. They obviously have significantly less wealth. They're paid less despite actually working more hours when you count all labor. Men may be in a bad financial situation. Any way you cut it, women don't have as much money or power as men. And some people might call that patriarchy, a system where one man might be disadvantaged compared to another woman, but in general, the system does tend to favor men when it comes to things like wealth and power. But other people would say that's a feminist plot to get even more of the money they don't actually possess but somehow control. I was never really clear on what their argument for that was. I guess political power and money and the material conditions don't matter as much as getting harassed on dating profiles, because that's where the real power is. And that's always struck me as odd, because if men really think that sexual attention from other men is so empowering, no, they're never going to do this. But if they wanted to, I think most misogynists could probably get dolled up and find the seediest gay bar, and it might take a while, but I'm sure they could find men that would hit on them and objectify them and not value their consent and grope them and treat them a lot like how they treat women, or would at least like to be able to get away with treating women. Now, it's going to be harder for them, I think, but if they want to be harassed and objectified and have men that they are not sexually interested in touch them and proposition them, and they want the potential for sex that they don't want and don't enjoy constantly thrust upon them, both figuratively and sometimes literally, and want to be pressured into sex and shamed for saying no, and especially with how we view homosexuality, if they want to face social stigma for having sex or being sexually desired, they could have all of that. But they don't. And it's funny, because when you start talking about consent and boundaries and personal space in terms of men not touching them, they instantly get it. They're like, oh yeah, I wouldn't like that. But women wanting that, well, that's just not fair to men, because they're entitled to women. They played by the rules. Where is their perfect trad wife waiting for them? Because they upheld the system, and that's what they were promised by advertising, by society. Everything in their life pointed to them that if they played by the rules, that's what their reward would be. That's what all the movies said. So where is she? It must be women's fault, because women, for some reason, are allowed to choose their partners now. It's a great injustice. And while we have to fight socialism and all efforts to redistribute wealth from the very top to those who actually produce things, the workers, that is unjust. But what we need to do is redistribute the women. That's the kind of socialism we need. Anyway, so this is very much like fascism in that it blames the powerless for the actions of the powerful. And I think what men in this position don't understand is that the power that patriarchy grants them isn't all that useful and doesn't benefit them. And they should be fighting patriarchy because it hurts them. Unless they genuinely start off as misogynists, which most men, that isn't their starting point. I don't think it's a natural thing to hate more than half of humanity. The power patriarchy gives them is not gratifying. It's not useful. It's definitely not going to lead them to fulfillment and, a happy relationship or a happy kind of life. It's a miserable existence whose only benefit is, well, at least there's someone under you. At least you're at the top of the heap in your own household. And that is very unfulfilling, because maybe I'm naive, but I think people actually seek out equal partnerships. I do not think patriarchy or hierarchical relationships or any of this is natural. And they would disagree, and they have. And that's the thing about anti-feminism. Any of their major talking points, other than, the injustice of the male-only draft is true. It's not really a highly relevant issue right now. You're hard-pressed to find all that many men who have actually been hurt by that. Because you'd have to go back to the last time we had a draft, which was Vietnam, which is, I don't deny that was a great injustice, and it was perpetrated against men. But as far as men today, it is not something we're currently facing. Although, if they are truly worried about that, you'd think that they'd support the ERA, because the main opposition that Shafley and other anti-feminists pushed was that we can't have this because it would mean we'd have to draft women. And actually, it was feminists were among, I think it was the Feminist Majority Foundation, National Organization for Women wrote an amicus brief. It was them who challenged the draft at the level of the Supreme Court back in the 80s on the basis of it being gender discrimination against men. But that's where some of the entitlement comes from, is being told rightly by feminism that they have this privilege and power, but they don't see that in their lives. Another example of this would be how men tend to think women are exaggerating or whining about the problem of sexual harassment, because they'll say stuff like, well, I'd be happy to be sexually harassed. And it's like, well, you don't face the downsides that women do. To be sexually harassed and in a position of power is a very different experience. But if they want the true femme experience, well, that would be one where they live in the same reality that women face. Sex for men is generally a very positive thing. It's something that they're encouraged to pursue, so they're actually pressured to pursue it. They're not judged or slut-shamed. They don't lose status. Their very humanity and worthiness of a partner or to be loved isn't diminished from having sex. They are not relentlessly questioned about their sexual choices. Their future partners aren't as likely to give them guilt about having a high so-called body count. Obviously, if they are queer or they do things that are outside the masculine standards, they are very heavily policed. But as long as they stay within that range and they're pursuing women, or especially if they're pursued by women who are conventionally beautiful and white and young, then they are celebrated. So of course they'd love to be sexually harassed, but it wouldn't be the same experience because they don't face the consequences that women do. They definitely don't face the same threat of violence, stalking, and sexual assault. And, men also aren't put in a position where women are told, oh, just keep pursuing men. They're just playing hard to get. That's how they are. Yeah, no means yes. It's all confusing. Don't listen to them. They don't know what they're thinking. They're not very smart. They're just guided by their emotions. They don't have to deal with an entire culture that objectifies them in the same way, at least, and to the same extent, and sees them as a commodity. Dating apps haven't helped with that, and the way we commodify people and relationships hasn't helped. But that's a reason. It's not an excuse to do it. Obviously, you can live in this culture and not be a rapist and not objectify women and actually value people for their humanity. Just the sex itself, men are pretty much guaranteed that it is going to be pleasurable, because the way we define sex itself is male pleasure. I can't even list all the ways that the reason they don't understand why it's a problem is because they have never faced these problems. They just don't understand it. Well, why would women not want this? It's because, well, yeah, of course, if we had all the privileges of patriarchy, yeah, it wouldn't be as much of a problem. Though they do seem to understand how this is a problem if it's a man pursuing them. So they do understand consent, because they understand consent when it's their body, just not a woman's body. And that is an indication of how they humanize women and see them as a prize or a thing rather than a genuine human being. Another thing, men are generally not expected to tiptoe around women's emotions the same way women have to for their own safety. And it is true that saying you are in a relationship with another man is going to be more persuasive to someone who's aggressively pursuing you than saying you're not interested. I don't have a great explanation for why that is. I don't know if it's because men fear violence or some kind of social consequences for pursuing a woman that, quote unquote, belongs to another man, or what it is. But that's what I usually tell people. I don't tell them I'm not interested. I tell them I'm single, but I tell them I'm not dating, because that's honestly the only thing that is final for most men, that are inconsiderate enough that they're just going to approach women in public who've given no indication that they're interested in talking to them. And it's scary sometimes. I was at a grocery store last year, and this guy just followed me then, and I was there for like half an hour, and I tried to avoid him, but he just followed me, and he came up and he immediately started touching me, and I wanted to punch him, but I was alone, and he's like twice my size. The store's closing, and I have to walk out to my car in a couple minutes. And so I gave him my real number, and I'm glad I did, because you know what the first thing he did? He called it to make sure it was right, and my phone pinged, and he's like, oh, okay. And I don't want to lead this guy on, but I will if that's what's going to keep me safe, because that's what got me to the parking lot, and that's what got me home. And that's the position women are put in every single day. And if you think the women don't put up with this, I promise you they do. They just don't tell you because they don't think you're a safe person to confide in. And that's something you should really think about, because this is something every woman either has faced or does face on a regular basis. And it doesn't matter what you wear. It doesn't matter what you look like. If you're even femme presenting, you will get this kind of harassment. And it isn't all about attraction. Some of it is, just honestly out of spite. And I don't know if it's like a macho thing, especially when men get together with the catcalling. It's almost something that they do to impress other men more than, because they have to know that, like when I was in Chapel Hill, I was standing next to a woman and her pre-K daughter, and some guy yelled, and I was going to work. It wasn't, not that it should matter, but it wasn't like I was dressed to go out partying or anything, but he yelled something really vulgar out the window at me about oral sex, and she looked at me like I had done something wrong. What do you expect me to do about this guy? I'm sorry your daughter had to see that, but I don't know, maybe she had to see that to know that's what things are going to be like for her when she's a little older, and not much older. If you want to know how bad things are, actually, if women don't talk to you about this stuff, don't ask them, because they've made it clear that you have not acted in a way where they feel safe telling you. But if you have friends who do talk about this stuff with you, I would invite you to ask them, if you want your world shattered, how old they were when they first were either like sexually harassed or leered at or made to feel unsafe or uncomfortable by a obviously adult man, because it is very young. And that is another part of patriarchy, is weird obsession with youth and naivety, and the idea that once women are, like, girls are ideal because they're innocent and pure and you can mold them and manipulate them and control them, and women are just ruined because, first of all, they're not virgins anymore, which you might as well just throw the whole woman away at that point. What insecure man wants a sexually experienced woman? She actually knows what she wants, and she will tell you. You don't want that. You want to be as horrific in bed as possible, because, why would you have sex for a reason other than your own pleasure? You don't want to have to worry about her pleasure. Jeez, that's just way too much work. You want her to fake pleasure for your own ego gratification, and actually care about that. And, conservatives get to the point where they don't even think that women enjoy sex. They think that it's a big scam to trick men, which is, again, it's a situation where it's like, I don't think they realize how much they're telling on themselves. But it is a problem, and I don't think men have a great idea of how bad it is. And we saw it with like the man-bear debate, and I think one thing that was missing from, not all the conversations on that, is women saying, look, we want to trust men, but the thing is, if we get assaulted and we did anything that was trusting, or we took any, I don't even want to say risk, we existed in a public space alone in a way that didn't take every single precaution to avoid being sexually assaulted. If we were too polite, if we were too flirtatious, if we smiled, if we wore something, anything. There's an exhibit where you can see what people were wearing when they were raped. And if you look at that, you can see it's not about what women are wearing. Not that that should matter. But the thing missing from that discourse was that women are saying, we're not allowed to trust men. If we do, this is what happens. We will be blamed. And one of the major common factors in people who end up with post-traumatic stress disorder from being sexually assaulted, it's the hopelessness and frustration and absolute betrayal felt, sometimes called the second assault, which is being abandoned by the people that you trust, not being believed. The support structures that you thought you could count on aren't there anymore. Your friends don't take your side. No one believes you. And this is something that's kind of unique because, I've gotten my stereo stolen twice. But whenever I've had something stolen or been a victim of some kind of crime or harm against me, the question isn't that I would lie about my stereo being stolen or my car being broken into or my apartment being broken into. But if I'm being stalked or harassed or assaulted, that's a normal response, not just from law enforcement, but from people close to you. And it is a devastating experience. And I mean, I'm getting kind of sick of saying I wanted to think that more men would understand, but obviously I was a bit too optimistic. But I keep fighting to change that. Not for me, but because I don't want anyone else to go through what I did.